Hey, howdy people. I just got back from seeing Wicked for Good, and I wanted to talk about this. It is currently 1:20 a.m. because I went to a 10:15 showing, so it's a little bit late, and so I'm going to have to talk a little bit quietly because I don't want to wake up other people in the house. But let's talk about this. If you know the story of Wicked, then a lot of the spoilers in here are not going to be real spoilers, but if you are not wanting to be spoiled by things that this adaptation does with the story, I will be having like a spoiler section for more specific things. But let's just kind of start with the non-spoilery, at least generally non-spoilery stuff. The big question on everyone's mind that everyone's thinking going into this movie, is it as good as the first one? Because the first one was really good. It's genuinely, I think, my second favorite movie musical of all time, which isn't saying much because most movie musicals are pretty, but it's just my second favorite behind Sweeney Todd. And this one is not as good. And I'm going to kind of give some general reasons why and then go into a bit more specific reasons. But first of all is the pacing. I feel like the thing that most people have heard about this movie is that the pacing is weird, is that it's slow in parts, it kind of drags in parts. And I wouldn't say necessarily that it feels unnecessarily slow. Like the slower moments do feel like some interesting plot moments or things like that. But the first hour and 15 minutes of this movie is like setting up with some weird stuff that I'll get into later. And then the last like solid 45 minutes to an hour is all like the payoff for things and like the emotional impact of everything. But that whole first hour 15, hour and a half is just like, come on. All right, come on. We know where this is going. Here we go. We're referencing things. We're setting things up. Come on. And it just doesn't have the same impact that the first movie had, which I feel like had much better pacing overall, even though it still took its time with things. I think the pacing and structure of the movie as a whole was better in the first movie. This second movie as well has a lot of stuff that feels rushed while also feeling slow. And I cannot quite explain it exactly, but there are some scenes and some character moments in here that feel like, oh, and then there's this and we're moving on. And I would have liked a little bit more time with some things. There are a few moments like that that are related to like the Wizard of Oz storyline and the Dorothy and her friends going to get the wizard stuff, like, or the witch stuff like that, that's skipped over, which, you know, is fine because we all know the story of the Wizard of Oz. But this movie kind of, and I guess if you know Wicked as a whole, I don't know. I knew nothing about this story going into it, and so this is like an experience for me as someone who has passively enjoyed musicals, has been in some musicals, thinks they're kind of cringe for the most part now, and has known nothing about Wicked. Going into it with that mindset, I think it skipped over some stuff that I would have liked to see a little bit more from the Wizard of Oz story, and it kind of retconned some things. I don't know if the original musical does, but it kind of retconned some things that happened in the Wizard of Oz movie, and it just feels a little bit weird. And you're like, well, wait a minute, hang on, how'd they get there? How'd they come to that conclusion? How did this happen there? And it's just a little bit odd. Also, as well, the songs in this in Act 2 are just not as good as the songs in Act 1. Act 1 just has so much better songs. There are so many more interesting, better written songs in general, and I feel like that's kind of a consensus that just everybody can kind of get on board with. At least most people that I've talked to about the musical are like, yeah, Act 2 is just not as good. In terms of like consistent bangers, Act 1 is just like bam, 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 bam. Like all the songs are great. Here in Act 2, you know, the big Glinda Elphaba duet is a nice emotional moment. No Good Deed is just like the best song by far in all of Act 2, especially because like that's kind of like the turning point after that like hour 15 mark where it kind of shifts and goes into like the more emotional second half of it, that was really good. I really enjoyed No Good Deed and like most of what happened after that. But I do feel like a lot of the other songs were just kind of like there and they weren't really great. There were some songs in there I've never heard before in my life. And I don't think, I'm pretty sure they were all in the musical, but you know, Wicked being one of the most popular musicals of all time, I feel like everybody knows Popular, everybody knows Dancing Through Life, everybody knows No One Mourns the Wicked, everybody knows Defying Gravity, everyone knows For Good. Some people know, what's the one I just said? What's the one? No Good Deed, like things like that. But then you think about like other songs, like Glinda's little sad song that I forgot, or like the Wizard's song, or like just the things like that just don't hit as much as the other songs do. So that was kind of a little bit of a letdown as well. And me not having heard like half the songs in Act 2 before in my life, they're just not as good. And I can see why I haven't heard them before, because they're not as popular, because they're not as good. But overall, still, you know, production-wise, I think the music was good. It's just the songs themselves are not great. So it's not really a blight upon the movie. It's just, I think the source material isn't as good in Act 2. There were also some weird performance things that kind of like weirded me out. Michelle Yeoh's character, I don't remember her being as cringe in the first movie, but this is possibly the worst performance of her entire career, and she's a great actress. But this is clearly just a take the paycheck and go kind of role, and I don't think it was a role that fit her very well. I was more kind of just like, okay, yeah, sure, with her character in the first movie, and it's been a year since I've seen it. But here specifically, she felt really off, and her acting was extremely dry and felt like she was reading from a script at times. There was one scene I almost laughed out loud, because there's one part where she like walks in and she sees Glinda and she's like, no, oh no, why? And like it's verbatim, it sounds like that. And her face the whole time is, no, oh no, why are you here? It's like Elphaba. I meant Elphaba, not Glinda. She wouldn't get mad at Glinda being there, but things like that. Like her character was just not great. There were other characters that were really good and surprised me, like Bach's character. The stuff that he does in this movie, he starts off and you're like, okay, yeah, it's Bach, and then he progresses and you're like, oh, okay, all right, and stuff happens, and if you know what happens, you know. I knew a little bit of what happened, but some of it was surprising. I'll go into that a little bit more in the spoiler section. So talk about that later when we get into like story spoiler stuff. But again, if you know the story of Wicked, I guess it's not really going to be story spoiler stuff. But just overall, I think it was a little bit weird. There were some strangely acted like comedy scenes that were a little bit kind of like uncomfortable comedy, where it's like, I guess that's funny, but it's just kind of more so weird. And then just stuff like that, where it was just kind of a little bit off. But overall, like, you know, it's got the same production value as the original. It's got the same, like, good musical performances as the original, except for Michelle Yeoh. Again, awful. What was that woman doing? Like, that is not a role for her. She's really good in other stuff, but not here. Not here, especially in this one. But, you know, overall, it was not terrible. It just felt like kind of a slightly underwhelming conclusion. And I walked out of the theater and I turned to the friends that I saw it with, and I was like, yeah, you know, like, I was like, yeah, that happened. That's the end of the story. Okay. That's how it ends. And that's kind of how you feel. You just kind of, you're like, yeah, that's how it ends. Okay, cool. All right. And then you just go on with your day. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. It was kind of in the middle. I think it could have been worse. It was fine, whatever. All right, some slight spoilery stuff I want to go into, just kind of going over some things that felt weird, and I don't know if it's a thing with the plot specifically or if it's a thing that the movie just did. But first of all, I want to bring up like the lion was in like one scene, and he was like mad that Elphaba freed him, so he decided to turn on her and help the others kill her. Why? That felt very out of character for a character who already had very little character, like in general. But like, why? Like that didn't make much sense at all. I would have liked a little bit more stuff with the animal characters. At the end, it's kind of like, and they're back, and maybe they'll learn to speak again. I don't know, but like the doctor, who had a lot of characterization, the goat doctor, I forgot his name, who had a lot of characterization in the first movie, he like shows up in one scene and he's in a cage and he's sad in the second movie, or yeah, in this one, and like that's it. There you go. Okay, goodbye, this guy, I guess. Sure. So like stuff like that was weird. Also like going into the way that like Elphaba acted and the way that she became wicked or whatever, you know, that makes sense, because she's like, all right, I keep doing all these good things and I keep being punished for it, and then no good deed happens, and you know, like the movie actually starts getting kind of good. Why would she not try to clear her name? I mean, I kind of understand that she's sort of in the mindset of like, oh, they need someone to blame for this. And it's like, wouldn't she want to be in a world where we don't have someone to blame? I mean, you can push the blame on Michelle Yeoh's character or the wizard. Like, why do you have to be? Can't you clear your name? Also, she absolutely could have told Elphaba that her and Fiyero were alive at the end. Why does she have to keep that a secret? Maybe I'm just stupid, but like stuff like that was just weird. It's like, this feels like emotional. Oh no, and Glinda will never know that I'm alive. Like, why? Just tell her and be like, you can't tell anybody, but I'm alive. We're fine. Just okay. See ya. Love you. Bye. Like, why couldn't you do something like that? It just felt unnecessary. Also, I liked Glinda and Fiyero heading off into Arrakis and setting up for Dune Part 3 at the end. That was fun. But like little things like that just kind of take you out of it. And you're like, wait a minute, why? Huh? And like you kind of just sit there and you have to think about it. You're like, why did she do that? Couldn't she have just like, things like that were a little bit weird. Also, there were a lot of moments in this where they would, and I'm struggling to just remember specific parts of it, but there were a lot of moments where they would be like, and here's this reference to this song, and we said there's no place like home, don't you get it, isn't that funny? And we referenced this other song that was in the first part, and now we said, oh, look at the weather's changing, haha, that's referencing the tornado that's going to come and bring the house. It's like stuff like that where it's like wink wink nudge nudge references, and I'm just like, ugh, like it feels weird. It feels unrealistic. Like some of the dialogue just feels a bit, I mean, I say unrealistic in a movie musical, but just like something about it just feels differently unrealistic in a different way. Because obviously it's a sort of like fantastical story. It's in this magical fantasy land, but some of the dialogue just feels forced to be like, and here's a reference to this song, and here's a reference here, like little nods, and then like the character will like look at the camera and like say something, or why? Not in like a break the fourth wall kind of way, but just in a way where it's like the filmmakers were like, and now that's a reference to that, and only the smart people are gonna get it, and like all the people in the audience got it because it's the most obvious thing in the world. Just stuff like that. A lot of the stuff that I didn't like about this movie are just mostly a lot of little nitpicks. But all those little nitpicks add up to just keep lowering my enjoyment of the movie to where it's just kind of like, by the end, like I said, I was like, yeah, you know, this is a movie and it's fine. And whatever, it concludes the story set up in part 1, I guess, in a way, but it just feels kind of unsatisfying. Also, in part 1, I was tearing up several times in the theater. There were so many great moments in part 1, musically and like character dynamically and emotionally, that like had me tearing up and almost crying in the theater. And I did not even slightly choke up once in this entire movie. No, correction. I almost did, and it was a No Good Deed because it was so cool. No Good Deed was epic. And then everything else was just like, even like for good. Like, it was okay. Okay, they sing their little duet. They stand in one spot for 7 straight minutes and they just sing and look at each other and then they hug. Okay, whatever. Fine. It was fine. It was a fine movie. And I don't know, I feel like I'm coming off a little bit harsher than I actually feel about it, but I'm just kind of bringing up the negatives because that's what's on my mind. But there was some good stuff in here too. There's some stuff to love, but sorry, voice crack. There's some stuff to love, but overall, it's just not as good as the first one. But it's fun. You could technically like get to the end of part 2 here, and then just go back and watch the first one. It kind of like loops back in, because the first one starts with, oh, the witch is dead, right? So, whatever. It's fun. I just wanted to kind of talk about my thoughts about it, like coming home fresh right after seeing it. So, that's what I think. What do you think about it? Have you seen it? Let me know. Let me know what you thought of it. Let me know if you have not seen it, if you're excited to see it, now that I've just like been absolutely hating on it for 17 minutes straight. All right, cool. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Goodbye.